Welcome back and thank you for staying with All Angles. Now, South Africa's agriculture sector is unable to be globally competitive because of the state of our roads. A survey by Statistics South Africa shows that only about 8% of all agricultural products are transported by rail. To unpack the transport impediments to growth, I'm joined by the chief economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo. Wandile, thank you so much for your time here on ENCA. Can you tell us, on average, how much is South Africa losing monthly, in terms of the agriculture sector to be able to transport goods to either our country or other parts of the world without proper transport or infrastructure assisting?
Maseko, I would say, for me, the point is slightly a bit more nuanced in a sense that there is a deterioration of our roads and a lack of maintenance. And of course, this has become worse over the past 2 or 3 years with heavy rainfalls that have also added onto that. But as per the competitiveness of our sector in the global market, as we speak today, we're still reasonably competitive. We export about half of what we produce in value terms to the world. But the challenge that comes about is to say, if then the roads are not maintained in the current state that they are in, or even improved, then we run a risk of the competitiveness issue the line. To the number that you're asking to say how much is the sector losing, what we're seeing happening a lot today is that the agribusinesses and some certain farmers, instead of using their capital to actually reinvest in the business and expand their operation, they find themselves having to use millions of rands on maintaining the road and even constructing some that are linking into their sector, while the municipalities should actually be doing that job. So the issue now is that the money that could have been reinvested in growing the sector is going elsewhere into the infrastructure, and that's a problem. And of course, down the line, if this is not resolved, it will become a big challenge.
And I imagine, Wandile, that small-scale farmers are the worst affected.
You're 100% correct there, because of course, for small-scale farmers or even the medium-scale farmers, I mean, in South Africa, in the 40,000 farming units, commercial farming units that are registered for VAT, I mean, if you look at those, it's only just under 3,000 farming units that are having an income that is over 22 million rands. Many people in the farming sector, those that are registered for VAT, you find that about 2/3 of them, they making income of less than 2 million rands. And I'm putting those numbers in here to show that a majority of the people that are farming in the commercial space, they actually don't have the capacity to maintain some of these roads by themselves. You take those, you combine with the subsistence farmers and some of the small-scale farming, it means that anywhere where the roads are not in good condition, they struggle to deliver the products to market. And of course, that means that there are some losses that are being made on that. Or if they group together to actually try to maintain roads, that's again the capital that could be reinvested in the businesses, having now to be deployed on infrastructure, which is something that the municipalities should actually be dealing. So it's a major issue.
And I can imagine even those in rural areas, because that's where road infrastructure is completely forgotten. At least in urban areas here and there is potential to fix it, even though it breaks down again. But in rural areas, they're left completely behind. And Wandile, according to an Agri-SA report, it says on average 94% of farmers, or rather farmers actually rely 94% on rail, or rather on transporting their goods and produce via the roads instead of rail, etc. So I can imagine that this is also putting food security at risk in South Africa, which obviously already is at risk at the moment. And the more we leave, the rail unattended to, and fixing the rail infrastructure unattended to be able to assist freight, this is going to worsen. The food security issues in South Africa will worsen.
Yeah, I think the challenge there, which I mean, the survey identifies quite importantly, is the fact that we have to try to invest in the railway structure. There are conversations that are happening between the Agribusiness Chamber, Agbiz ourselves, Transnet, Agri-SA, and the others to say, can we come up with a plan to ensure that the railway facilities take a much better share than they currently do in the sector. Because, I mean, if you go back to the 80s, railway line used to play an important role on that. But of course, there are discussions that are deeper on that where you have to think about the financing of all of those things. But I think the important thing about today is that Transnet is on the table, but there needs to be more concerted effort on improving the railway facilities as well as on the ports facilities. But I will stress the point again to say what is at risk is rather more of a future event than the immediate term, because in the immediate term, it is true that South Africa is having one of the best agricultural seasons. We have the third largest grain harvest now in the history of this country. But again, to your point, food is produced somewhere in the country, and it has to be transported to a certain point to be consumed. And there are costs involved in that transportation. The better the roads, the higher the transaction cost, then the higher the price at the end of whoever I have to that product. These are all inefficiencies that shouldn't have been there, need to be resolved collectively, but the municipalities have a greater role to play in this. And I'll close this point by saying we have in South Africa national plans that are being put out in Pretoria to say we need to grow agriculture by XYZ percentage. But if the municipalities are not doing their own part, that undermines all of the national rural economic plans that are being set out in Pretoria, because the actual work happens in the towns. That's where the improvements needs to happen, while the thinking and the writing tends to happen a lot in Pretoria. So the actual work for improvement.
And I think your point, goes to the fact that we've been trying to stress on this channel how important local government elections are, where we've seen statistically South Africans, we'll see obviously next year, South Africans are pitching up more for national government elections instead of the municipal ones. And those are the ones that actually affect you directly as a resident of certain municipalities that obviously will then not perform to your expectations. But lastly, Wandile, in terms of the time that it takes to transport these goods, to fix road infrastructure and rail, then the time it takes to actually transport these goods will basically also be, less than what it's taking right now, right? Which means that in terms of food security and produce, items or food items that need to actually stay in the cold chain. That's also something else that's important, because we've spoken to farmers who say they've had to throw away so much food because, the road to getting the food to their clients is so long that when it gets there, it's spoilt already.
Yeah, I mean, you're stressing an important point there, because, I mean, when you're in agriculture, you are dealing with perishables. So the efficiency, something that is very important, which, of course, the railway lines and even the better roads, because, I mean, this is not a one or another conversation. It's about having roads that are in good condition and functioning fairly well, serving the sector. And secondly, is seeing improvements and efficiencies on the railway line. On the railway line, there are conversations that are happening Transnet, but I do think that at municipalities, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. And the food security worries are something that is down the line if we don't see improvements in the road networks. And I think that the survey and the studies that you are citing are a wake-up call to say something has to happen. But to close with a point of comfort for South Africans is that the food security conditions in the country are intact as of today. But tomorrow depends a lot on what we do in improving the infrastructure. And of course, this point does not undermine the fact that farmers are incurring a lot of costs trying to ensure that this produce reaches the intended consumption point, which is something they should have been doing. They should be investing money back to their businesses had the municipalities been doing their jobs.